Well, hello and welcome again to the Skillwork Forum. As always, I'm Tim, joined with my partner here, Brett from Skillwork. And we gather on this podcast to talk about things surrounding the skilled trades. You know, what's happening, what are the trends, what are the emerging topics that are relevant to our organization, particularly it applies to leadership. So we're into the new year now. When this comes out, we're a few weeks into the new year here. And we thought it'd be just a great opportunity to talk about something a lot of companies do, maybe a lot of individuals do, but it's never too late to talk about the topic of setting goals, kind of putting forward a path for the future year. And we're going to do this in kind of two parts. The first part, Brett, we're going to talk about how do we do that on a personal level. And you and I are both kind of creatures of habit. And one of our habits is we are goal setters and, we like to write things out. So we want to talk a little bit about that on a personal level. But then how do you translate those to your organizational level goals and growth objectives? So with that, I think it's good for us to say, what about setting some definitions that primarily, what's the difference between goals versus growth? And that's one of the things we wanted to start out talking about first.
Yep. So like you said, I think both of us, are kind of big goal setters. I think, it's been one of the recent, it feels like a more recent debate on goals versus growth, and so I would say, number one, do something, pick one. Don't get too hung up on that. But, because I think, one of the things in personal growth requires, doing things on purpose, to find a purpose, kind of a thing. And so for years, I was a goal setter, I was a big goal setter. And I've been probably starting in the last few years to lean more towards, maybe a little bit more towards the growth side of things, while still setting. We'll talk about that a little bit. John Maxwell says he's the king of this, and from my standpoint. And so, John Maxwell says that goals make me do better, but growth makes me be better. So I think that's where a lot of people who tend to be goal setters, goals have an end in mind, and growth has no end in mind. And so at the same time, we're kind of driven to where we want to accomplish things. And so it's kind of a combination of those two. But
Yeah, I think that's great to point that out. And, it's almost like we talk as business leaders and owners, there's a difference between working in the business and working on the business. And, in the business, it's more tactical. What do I have to get done today? Which aligns more with what are my goals, what are my objectives? Working on the business is more that, what are we doing to grow? What are we doing to expand? Let's think more strategically. So one could think about growth as a more strategic way to look at this, and goals maybe, tactically, because I see goals as what are the steps I need to do to be able to achieve the growth that I want to get to. So with that in mind, goals to me, there's a start and a finish. There's a beginning, there's an end. I'm going to take these steps to reach this objective. If we were going to run a marathon, my goal is to, do a sub 4 minute marathon. That's my goal. The steps to do that are I've got a training plan. I've got to do this many. I've got to build up. I've got to do those steps. You can look at that same example, say, but from a growth perspective, I want to be able to really challenge myself to do really hard things. Mm-hmm. So that's growth. The goal would be these tactical things I'm going to do to achieve that sort of thing. So growth, as you said, Brett, it doesn't have a finish line. It's almost like growth is, it's your career where, day to day, that's my job. Mm-hmm. So kind of look at them in those two ways. It kind of helps me understand.
I agree. I have for many years, I've actually, my wife and I, Sally, we've kind of built a structure years ago, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later, about setting goals. But we set goals really kind of in 5 areas, of our life, kind of business, health, finances, spiritual, and then relationship goals. And then those kind of have layers in those. What I've noticed over the years, some of those areas have very specific, tangible goals attached to them. As a business, we'll probably talk about this more, in our next podcast. But as a business, you're going to have, we want to sell this much. We want to do, those things are kind of defined goals. Same, like with us with finances. I want to do want to save this much money, or we want to do this, or whatever the case may be. But what I've kind of found, and I think it's the reason why I've probably started to think more growth-minded than just specifically, I have these 10 goals in this, and I'm going to score myself, each year, is I've found as over time that a lot of those goals, they've kind of become embedded into my lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so I just continue to grow. It's like you and I both, would say it's not a goal per se for me to get up and read my Bible every day. It's just who I am.
Yeah.
And so it might have started as a goal, but eventually it just became a lifestyle. So I think those things, and they don't end. There's no end to that. It's like, well, I'm going to do it this year. Next year, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
And so I think it's morphed a little bit to a combination of goals and then growth goal. The ultimate being a growth goal.
Yeah, and I think that, as I write my goals out every year, and like you said, for me, probably the same ones, but I have 3: personal, that includes relational, and my own, what do I want to do from a personal perspective? Mm-hmm. That can be a health, that could be a fitness, that could be losing weight, that could be, I want to read certain number of books. I have professional bucket where I talk about, this is what I want to do in my role to get better in my role here at Skillwork, and mm-hmm. how do I want to develop professionally. And then a big one for me, and you mentioned, is spiritual. For me, it's in my faith, and what do I want to do to grow that? And so as I've done this, and this has been a habit of who I am for a number of years, it almost becomes routine to put these same goals down. And you're right, they've morphed into becoming more, strategic thinking, mm-hmm. sort of things that I'm doing. So I think maybe naturally it's kind of like setting a budget. If you've never done a personal budget, it starts off pretty black and white. And, you give rid of all your credit cards, count every penny. If you're a Ramsey guy, put your cash in your envelope. And eventually that becomes part of who you are, to where, now it's more, you're thinking, I'm doing those. Those are part of who I am. So maybe that what you're saying, and it resonates with me, is that when you set goals, they should be important enough that eventually you want them to become part of who you mm-hmm. are.
And I think that's the pushback for some people on goals is, well, I'm going to run a marathon. You used that as an example. But then after that, I'm not going to do anything for my health. It's like, is that really, was that, so that's kind of an endpoint goal. I did it, I'm good now, versus I want to have a continued kind of, I'm sure I'll quote Maxwell about 15 times, in this podcast, is it really comes about, he says a lot, consistency compounds. And what that really says, because we've developed the habit through taking actions of these goals that have now become lifestyle, and now that consistency compounds. For somebody that's at the beginning of this, if you're somebody and you're watching this and we're the 100th person that's told you since January 1 to set some goals, it's really about, for some people, it's just starting.
Yeah.
To start to form that consistency that I think you and I would say, well, we're still in work in process too, but we're maybe a little further down that. And maybe the encouragement is set the goals, form the habit, and eventually it kind of does morph a little more into just a life pattern of growth.
Yeah, and I think like everything in life that truly has substance and depth and you stick to, there's a why behind it. Mm-hmm. There's something that there's an intrinsic motivation in that. And we encourage people as we pour into, other young couples that I know you do, and Carla and I do, my wife, and, we encourage couples and individuals to have a personal mission statement. Mm-hmm. What do you want to stand for? What does your family stand for? And 10, 15, 25, at your funeral, what do you want to be said about you?
Yep.
It's one of the, I'm a big fan of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's an oldie but a goodie, and one of those is begin with the end in mind.
Yep.
Where are you trying to get to? And so start today. And for me, it's much easier when I look at my list of goals, and I've got them written out, and I can look at every one of those and say, do they align with, the bigger mission that I'm on, the calling that I'm on, and what I've been asked to do? If they don't align with the bigger why, then why?
Yeah.
Why am I doing it?
Yeah.
So that kind of gets to the next discussion point is, all right, we've talked about how we think about goals versus growth, and how do you then help somebody reset for the new year? Or how do you do it if you haven't done it, or you've read books, you've thought about it, and all these things? And, the traditional ones are like, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. I'm going to go to the gym. Those are all great. But again, so many people start off and don't finish. It's so easy to start but what to finish. So we're going to try to give you some approaches to think about on how you might be able to set some growth objectives. So here's an example we're going to go through. There's a framework. You may have heard of one called SMART. It's an acronym for your goals need to be specific, they need to be measurable, they need to be achievable, not something like if I said right now I'm going to run a 2-hour marathon. Okay, that's just not going to happen, right? Those years have come and gone, and they were never there to begin with. But they got to be achievable. They have to be relevant, meaning they matter with where you're going, and they have to be time-based. That's a goal. Yep. That's a SMART, S-M-A-R-T. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. That is one that many people use. We're going to talk to you one that's kind of like this, but it's another way to look at these parameters. But so what is the first thing you tell people when they're setting goals?
Yep. Well, I think once you've formed the habit a little bit, let's say you started this last year and now you're at the beginning of this year and you're, getting ready to set. So I think it is really important. A lot of people, set goals, growth goals, specific goals, and then by this time in January, they won't look at them again for the rest of the year. So I think one of the first step is to reflect on it. So you have to kind of reflect and review, not just at the end of the year, but really kind of throughout the year. So for me personally, both in business goals and obviously we'll get a little more focused on the business side in our next podcast. But from a personal side, which would be my wife and I, we're going to review those goals, on a regular basis. Now, never as frequent as we say we want to. It always seems like it gets away from us a little bit. But we're definitely, you want to have a pattern of reflect on that. And then at the end of the year would be to do this full assessment and kind of back to what you say, you're going to look at them through a little bit of that, some of it through that SMART lens to say, okay, were we close? Was the goal realistic? Am I setting realistic goals? We'll talk about a little bit here in a minute about maybe at the same time, are they too easy? I accomplished all my goals, in kind of a thing. So, and then ultimately, you got to be honest with yourself, was this goal not realistic or did I just not put forth the effort?
Yeah.
And so that reflection, I think, is important. It's not, you haven't really done much. You've done something by writing down your goals, but the idea is then the action, the steps, and so forth, going there and then kind of reflect on it.
Yeah, and we'll talk organizationally too, and we're big fans here about looking back. We call them retrospectives, but reflecting as part of this. That's a personal retrospective. You're looking back and you're trying to assess. You don't continually look in your rearview mirror, but it helps you understand where you've been to establish where you're going forward. So once you've reflected on it and given it some thought, we would encourage that to be prayer-based as well, and get some greater insight than we have ourselves. And that's the second thing then is to identify it. What is it that you want to do? Where do I want to go this year? What do I need to do differently? What's really important to me? Again, what are my values? And this is where I think it really helps to have, if you don't have somebody that you're reporting to or a peer that you have a relationship with where they are challenging you with giving you, here's some areas that you need to grow in. I'm a huge believer in the people that work for me and in my organization to give them tangible things that I think they need to do to improve to get where I think they need to go, where they've voiced where they desire to go. So you should get those things. Number one, if you're part of an organization, which you are, where's your organization headed? What are the things that matter to them? You should identify things that align with that and things specifically that align to what you've been told or what you've self-identified that is a gap that you need to fix to be able to achieve, the overall objectives of the company or on a personal level. What do you need to do differently? What does your team need to do differently? And that requires self-awareness and honesty and people to be able to speak in your life and say, this is where I think you need to improve. So identify what it is and be, like we said, be discreet. Actually put it somewhere that's measurable. You know, most of my goals I find they were getting more kind of qualitative and less quantitative, because maybe that's more of a growth mindset.
Yep.
But to the extent that you can, it ought to be something you can discreetly measure.
Yep. No, I agree. And I think it kind of along that, you know, you said it a minute ago, Tim, I think it's really, really important that you know the why behind your goals. Your chance of success of a long-term, especially growth goal, is to understand the why. You know, why is this important to me? Part of that is going to be, you said it a minute ago, you should have a family mission statement or that type of thing. So that's a personal thing. In a company, we would call it our core values, you know, and so, you know, obviously, you know, I shouldn't say obviously, I'd like to think obviously, you know, that it's recognizable that Tim and I are both people of faith. And so that drives, if you look at Sally and I's goals, it should be pretty evident from a standpoint of our marriage and my spiritual goals and my relationship goals and even our business goal. That kind of covers, it all fits into there. You know, here at Skillwork, you know, our core values are to bring honor to God in everything we do, to bring value and respect back to the trades, and to measure our success by the number of people we positively impact. So as we set goals here, well, some of them are very number-driven and tangible. At the end of the day, they come back to those values.
They better align with those.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I love that. And it's so important. So core values, personal core values, you never check out your personal core values when you're setting your organizational, professional goals. Your core values, personal core values have to be that. And if you're in a place, an organization where they are misaligned, then that's something you really need to address and ask yourself, is this a place where I can thrive? Because your personal core values ought to trump everything else in life. That's my perspective. And you know, your personal core values shouldn't be like a list of 100 things. They ought to be 4 or 5 key things that this is my fallback position. I don't go past these. Yep. You know, for me, and I think you and I aligned on this, honesty, integrity, putting others first, being as good a husband I can be, as good a father, as good a grandfather I can be, to try to do my job here well and to continually learn. There's these things that are like, everything I do is going to be aligned with those things, and everybody should have them. Otherwise, you know, you're just being tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine, as the Bible talks about. You're unstable in all your ways. So setting that, and we talk about a lot of times, you got to have a North Star. This is where you're going, and you know, everything should align with that. And if it doesn't misalign, you know, ask yourself why.
Yep. Whether, you know, it's a saying that gets quoted often. It's a great one, and it fits well into this conversation. You know, everybody's going to get somewhere in life. Some of us are just going to get their own purpose. Yeah. And that really comes down to this. You know, what are your values? Where are you trying to get? And then are you, you know, reflect and identify it, and then, you know, from a practical, then kind of setting those goals or type of thing. And some things, you know, some practical things, Tim, that get discussed is, well, how many goals should I have? How many's too many? How many's too few type of thing? There's probably not a definitive right or wrong answer to those questions. You know, I mentioned a minute ago from a personal standpoint, you know, I set goals, Sally and my wife and I do, for those 5 areas. And then inside of those 5 areas, you know, business and financial and personal and so forth, we're going to have 2 to 3 typically goals under each of those categories. Some may be a couple more, some may be less. I mean, there's definitely a point where less is more. And, you know, I mean, you got to be able to spend some time doing it. So if it's just like, you know, I got too many minute goals, like, you know, on and on and on. Yeah,
I would say when people come to me with their set of goals, I always try to roll them up. I think 4 to 6 is a good number to have, and you know, in a discrete area, because beyond that it becomes, well, they're unachievable. Yep. You can't do all that, or they're inch stones towards a major milestone. Yep. They're not really a goal. So, learning how to do that. And I love the fact you and Sally do it together, and I know you've trained other people on how to do it, and they're your goals as a couple. And that's crucial because I think, and like you and I, we're partners in another sense here at Skillwork, and our goals need to be aligned.
Yeah.
We need to make sure we're thinking the same thing for the organization, same thing on a personal level, family goals, husband and wives. I think they need to be aligned in where they're going.
Yep.
They need, that mission statement goes from a personal one. And then when you get, married, we would say then it needs to become a family one, and then same thing in a business organization, a team goal, an organizational goal. There needs to be some alignment there. So you set the goal, then you write it. Yes, write it. And I know a lot of people that are under 30 don't know what these things are. They're pens. They actually write. It's amazing. They put marks on paper. But just kidding. It doesn't have to be written with a pen, but document it is what we're saying. Document your goals, because if you don't write it down, then it just basically is a wish. You gotta write it down, put it where you can see it, review it frequently, adjust as needed. I personally, and I'm a list guy, I'm a checker, I'm a doer. So it comes naturally to me. Other people aren't so much. It's a discipline they really have to learn. I've learned to understand that not everybody's wired the way I am, which is good for the world. But the idea is I have daily goals. And I have weekly goals, and I have quarterly goals, and not only for me personally, but for the organization I lead. We have those things in place, and we check them. How are we doing against those things? So you got to put it down. Otherwise, it falls in the wayside of like, well, I started out the year doing something, but I just, didn't stick with it.
Yep. Oh, it's unfortunately by the time this podcast comes out, people that are reflecting already have already abandoned about half of their goals, but if you write them down, there's a little better chance, they say, that you won't. But, I would say don't get overly discouraged, but, at some point you got to form that habit.
Well, and I like what you and Sally do it together, because there's accountability there. By writing it down and expressing them to other people, there's some built-in accountability. When you invite somebody in and say, would you keep me accountable to this goal?
Yep.
I mean, that's a lot of people go like, well, it's kind of private. I'm like, that means you don't really want somebody.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I think the other, kind of on this list, couple more, is then to measure it. Tim was just kind of, you write it down, and then you need to be able to measure it. Tim just said, he looks at, kind of weekly, and then monthly, quarterly, whatever that pattern is. I'm similar, not so much from my broader goals, but I do, a weekly big three, I do a daily big three, those all roll up into my other. And so whatever that pattern is, whether that's a quarterly, monthly, whatever, but you need to be looking and measuring and know where you are.
Yep.
And are you getting there? I mean, I think that's, it's the old adage of, if you take the scoreboard down, would people be near as interested in the game? And so you got to measure, what you want to change.
Yeah.
And so
and I know your approach is, the planner focus, the
full focus
planner, and it's something similar, and other people can use different ones, but I would be willing to bet, I know you're well enough to know that the daily big three, the weekly big three, all those things are aligned to organizational goals and personal goals. And that's what we mean. There has to be alignment through there. Otherwise you're working on the wrong thing, potentially. So, or, you go back and reflect and go, maybe I need to adjust my goals. The last one on it, and we've talked about, is you got to own them. You got to be accountable by sharing it with someone else and asking them to check in with you. And the thing I would ask somebody is, are you trustworthy with yourself? Do you trust yourself? Are you disciplined enough to trust yourself? When nobody's looking, are you going to sneak in and get that candy bar at night? Are you going to weigh yourself? Are you going to go for that run early in the morning? Do you have that? Is that your nature? If it isn't, then you need more accountability. And you need to invite people into that, and then don't get upset with them when they call you on it. And that's, a lot of people need that in their life, and smart people who are not structured, and God has created people differently. They're very creative people, free-flowing, and that are inventors, and they ideate, that, God bless those people. We need them.
Yep.
They probably need somebody a little bit more in their life, I'm more structured than you are too, and we need those big thinking, ideation type people to help us in other areas. So recognize your weakness, get somebody to help you accountable. So How about some personal practices? We've talked a lot about it, Brett, but what are some daily habits as we kind of wrap up here, the personal goal thing?
Yeah, well, I think, like you said, from a personal and then just my own, I guess, I've established a system for myself to the point where, like you said, I just sent to somebody yesterday. They wanted to know kind of what's this process you follow that you and Sally do. And we turn it into something fun. We do it as a getaway. We do it a retreat weekend, as a goal-setting retreat weekend. Somehow I've convinced Sally it's fun. But we do. So we get away, we go for a weekend, type things. And
somewhere fancy like Utah, Nebraska.
Somewhere fancy, yes. Yeah, no, I won't pick a hotel brand. And so, but we get away, we do it, we make it something special, so to speak. Kind of my process a little bit is, as you've, indicated, to an extreme, I'm a very disciplined person. And so, my day starts at 4:15 a.m., I'm working out, I'm in the cold shower, and, I'm in the office by 6:30. So that's just normal for me. So I have a natural lean, to be very kind of habit forming anyhow. Some people don't have that as much, and they're going to need more accountability, like you said. So you just got to kind of know where you are. You mentioned it a minute ago from a practical. I personally use, the Full Focus Planner, have for years. Shout out to the Michael Hyatt Company. That's who created the Full Focus Planner. It has a very nice system of, it's got your annual, quarterly goals in the front, and then you got your weekly goals, you got your daily goals. It all should roll up, and he's designed into it where you do a reflection every week and to go back and say, how'd I do? And a lot of times, like, I did about 60% on that big 3 this week, and kind of a thing. So you're constantly kind of assessing that, and then obviously you got to look at your numbers. You got to say, how are we doing?
Yeah, and I've watched you do that, and I think it's great. It's a great personal example for a lot of people. You've helped a lot of people out with that. I know it's a passion for you and Sally, and we've benefited here. And I tend to be that way as well, pretty disciplined and structured that way. And I just believe in writing things down and tracking them and making sure they're aligned. And so we want to finish kind of with something that we both do, and maybe it's something that would be helpful to help people synthesize their thought. So we tend to, and I have for a while, it isn't something I've done forever, but probably for the last several years, really, even though there's always been kind of this idea, really crystallize this idea, what is my word? What is my one focus for that year? And that kind of helps drive some of those personal objectives and goals. And, and a lot of it has to do with the word, or ask God, what do you need me to focus on? And he tends to kind of give me that. And do you do that? I think you do. And what is your word for this year?
Yeah, I'm like you. It's a little bit of a newer discipline for me, but I do. So I pick a word. My word for this year, for 2024, is truth. And kind of where that kind of came from for me, I got convicted. C.S. Lewis, for those who know some of C.S. Lewis's writings, he had a quote many, many years ago called, "Love is something more stern and splendid than mere kindness." And to paraphrase that, what he was really kind of saying is, true love requires truth. And kindness is, to be kind to somebody is kind of the easy way out. At times, yeah. Because it's kind of easy not to share truth, to be kind, versus the other. Now you're going to be harsh, so you got to find that balance. So I just became convicted by that to say, am I taking the kind route, the easy route, more times than being truthful, because I really want to see that person grow or get to another level. So truth became my word. Shout out to John Gordon and a fellow by the name of Jimmy Page. They wrote a book called The One Word Challenge. And
the Led Zeppelin guitarist, or another Jimmy Page?
Different Jimmy Page.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because we didn't collaborate on our word, but it's interesting that it's very similar, although there's definitely a nuanced difference. Well, my word for this year is candor, which is not a word you hear and use a lot, but I read it in a book. I'll give credit to Paul David Tripp, who's a great thinker, and about leadership and other things that have to do with relationships and things like that. And one of his key areas for leadership team is the ability to have candor. And candor is truth speaking in love, which is interesting you said that, without hidden agenda or pride. It's that ability to just, this is truth speaking. I care about you enough. I don't have an agenda. There's nothing I'm bringing this to, I'm being a little bit evasive because I actually have this in mind. I want to come straight forward with it. And I think that's, like you said, a partner in the business, we need to be aligned. And that's interesting how we're both aligned in that way. Both similar. I think more of it's just slightly nuanced depending on where we need to personally improve. So that's it. That's kind of our thoughts for you guys in terms of, personal. We're going to have part 2 of this podcast. We're going to talk about organizational goals and how we do things here. Maybe a little different than some organizations, but it's not too late for you. Start thinking about this. Set some goals for yourself. Some intentional thinking, measure it. Use the SMART acronym or whatever you need to do to be able to identify, to reflect, to put some measurable goals out there that you can actually track and keep accountable towards throughout the next 12 months. And make sure your goals align with your own personal convictions and values. So thank you for tuning in to the Skillwork Forum. As always, we're very grateful for your time. We hope this discussion has had a positive impact on you today and in your life. Remember, Skillwork, ultimately, we exist to connect great, skilled craftsmen to outstanding companies that need them. So if you find yourself ever in need of a company that holds these values and that we can help you achieve your company objective goals as it relates to skill workers, please give us a call or reach out to us at skillwork.com. We'd love to talk to you. Until next time, God bless.